Good morning. As you've looked at it right now, we're in week 7, and as you can see from the title of the unit, we're into the whole concept of the operations-focused portion of the Baldrige criteria. And with me this morning is my good friend and colleague, Professor Chris Szpryngel. Chris is co-director of the undergraduate business programs here at the university. And in addition to his academic background, he brings a long experience in management, primarily in operations and both service and manufacturing environments. So what I'd like to do is just to see if we can get a different perspective on what some of the applications of the Baldrige principles and thought processes that you've been learning about, how they fit into actually running a business, making decisions, and working. So Chris, with that in mind, maybe a little bit from your background about how you have seen opportunities to apply these principles or worked with quality systems in the past.
Yeah. And let me just correct you.
Yeah.
I'm the co-director of the Malcolm Baldrige.
The Malcolm Baldrige
business.
I stand corrected, absolutely. But yeah.
From an operations perspective, whether you're running an organization or running a business unit, I think you have to ask yourself 3 questions. Do I want to be more competitive? Mm-hmm. Do I want to better meet my customers' needs? And do I want to make less mistakes? And when we talk about customers, we're not just talking about external paying customers, we're also talking about internal customers. So it could be your subordinates, your co-workers, your peers, and your supervisors. So I just want to keep that in mind when we talk about customers. We're talking about internal, which are other employees, or external, which are your paying customers or your consumers. From an operations perspective, if we look at what's going on in the world today, we're finding that employees are working and doing the jobs of 2 or more people. Since the recession, companies just cannot hang on to these large payrolls, so they've laid people off, offered early retirements, and now who's left is picking up that extra work because companies aren't hiring to replace those people. The goals are the same. You still have to make a profit, you still have to increase your profits, you have to show growth, and the work has to go out. You have to be productive, and now you're doing the work with more than what you were doing before. And I think it's important to understand that companies will continue to be slow to hire. And the key is, what can we as employees and employers do to continue to be highly productive but not get burnt out?
Do you think some of these ideas that we've seen, and you're familiar with many of them, in quality systems which have tended naturally towards those ends, do you see that maybe as accelerating a little bit, the need to apply the thinking of quality and continuous improvement and everything to meet some of those conditions that you just talked about?
Absolutely critical. It's crucial. When we talk about processes, we're looking at what to improve. But when we look to see what we need to improve, we don't want to put the blame on people. We want to find fault in the process itself. That's critical. And because every single process has customers and suppliers, right? And you ever want to place the blame on someone, you want to look at the process, what's wrong with the process, now let's fix it. And there's 3 things to do. Number 1 is you will need to identify the work process.
Yeah.
So what is it that you're doing? What is, as an organization, you're doing? What is your job? What are your job tasks? And the second thing to do is to identify what are the support processes. So in an organization, whatever business unit you're working, you might be dealing with sales, you might be dealing with marketing, you might be dealing with manufacturing, you might be dealing with human resources, you may be dealing with the IT infrastructure, and you need to identify all those processes. And once you can do that and identify, now you have to identify an owner for each process. But it's not as simple as delegating. You'll take care of this and you'll take care of that. You need an owner who has the authority to make changes and the authority to remove barriers. And once you can do those 3 things, identify the key processes, identify support processes, and identify the owner of a process, I think you're on the way to develop a solid plan.
Well, I think too, what you're referring to then is that there's consequences in the systems thinking part of Baldrige requires us to understand that there's consequence in whatever we do is the integrated nature of what's going on. It's going to affect somebody else's process.
That's right.
And if we're not aware of that, then that could lead to, I don't want to say disaster, but unintended
It can.
consequences.
I was talking with one of the local manufacturers who sits on our management advisory board, and he's the vice president of operations, and the way the process works for them is they're waiting for the salesperson to submit a written order for the work to make whatever widgets they make. They're in the zinc coating business. The salesman keeps telling the factory to prepare for this big order, yet the factory operator doesn't have the order yet. And they cannot produce anything until the order comes in, because if they start manufacturing and the order doesn't come in or something happens last minute, you're going to be sitting on a lot of excess inventory, which will then impact all the employees. It'll impact the sales staff, it'll impact the service staff, delivery staff, so it's a very systemic process.
Great example, because that can do, and what most of us understand are financial results, and as soon as you say to an old finance guy like me, excess inventory, I just see dollar signs with wings on them going out the window.
And from a sales perspective, they want to just get the order in because they want to make the customer happy, they want to deliver quickly, and it's just not that simple, and you have to wait on other departments and other people to accomplish the order, which is, the bottom line is to deliver the order to the customer.
Would you say then that from the operations focus point of view, that maybe the most critical mindset you can walk in with is to maintain that systems perspective, that idea of interrelationships of everything that's going on within your organization?
It's important to understand that everything is interdependent on each other. It's just the way it works. You take, and that's where you have to start talking about stakeholders. Who are your stakeholders? Take a simple company like Staples, an office supply business. We see the stores and people walking in and out. The Staples also supplies organizations, and you see the big red trucks. So let's say post-university had a spending freeze. We were no longer spending money on certain things. How do you think that would impact Staples? The drivers, the shippers, those in the warehouse, those in the front store, the back store. If we stop spending the Staples, someone's not going to get revenue. So now Staples may have to cut back on some of their processes, their people, their systems, their purchases may be held back, and that affects all the other companies that support Staples, and those companies that support Staples. So we have to be cognizant of a systemic relationship, no matter what we attempt to do, what initiatives we put in, and the reason why we do it.
That's, I think, a great example on everything, and what I would like to do now is just tell Chris to go back to work and do more with less. Is that the problem you're going to face, and that's really what we've been talking about?
Absolutely.
And any final thoughts about the operations perspective here?
We have to talk about people because people are important, and I think it's vitally important that we find ways to motivate and engage our employees. We also need to find a way to support our employees, because if we can do that, then our employees will support the organizational mission and vision, the strategic plan. I think it's also important that we align employee goals with organizational goals. And to do that, we have to work on employee development. And it's not just to have productive employees, it's also to retain employees. And we develop employees by performing regular reviews, by offering them regular feedback, consistent feedback, coaching, and organizations have to invest in training. It is crucial that we train our people, because if we want them to do something, we need to show them how, explain why, and I think that's going to develop a great relationship between the organization and the employees. It's about the people.
And I think what you've just seen is the way Chris just explained that to us, is the progression that we've walked through many of the Baldrige principles as how they build on each other, and we've already talked quite a bit about, even before we got here to operations, we talked about focus on your internal and external customers. We've talked about organizational learning. We've talked about personal learning. We've talked about employee focus. And began the whole process with talking about visionary leadership and having everybody on the same page. So I think we can see that this is a systemic process. It is not a prescriptive, just go do this, that, and the other thing, but it's how we have to have a mindset in running our business. And we said right up front that quality is a mindset, and I think these have been great examples. So, Chris, thank you for taking the time this morning, and
Thank you, sir.
We'll do this again.
All right, thanks, everyone.